Budget just days away, the question on everyone's mind is, what is the Finance Minister going to do this budget to try and give fillip to consumption? And who better than Mr. Kumar Rajagopalan, CEO at Retailers Association of India, and Mr. Anand Ramanathan, partner in consumer products and retail sector leader at Deloitte, joining in to throw light on exactly that. Gentlemen, both of you, thank you so much for taking the time out and speaking with us today at ET Now. Anand, if I could start off the discussion with you, tell me what are the key priorities for the entire consumption and retail sector from the budget this time around?
Great. So I think from a consumption standpoint, couple of things which are really important. One is, can we look at urban consumption? There has been a lot of talk about a lot of consumption happening in the 2 years post the pandemic, and then that leading to some level of indebtedness, which has slowed urban consumption, right? So can we look at things like low-cost housing? Can we look at putting in more money in the hands of the consumer through tax savings? All of these could be potential areas where urban consumption can improve. The second big area is obviously rural consumption itself. It has been doing a little better than in the past. We are seeing green shoots in the rural economy. Infrastructure spending is up. And further momentum there, along with agricultural reform to put more money in the hands of the farmer. And again, low-cost housing here too, which has a multiplied effect on the rest of the economy. These could all be potential areas where we can see an uptake in rural consumption.
Right. Mr. Rajagopalan, if I could get you into the discussion, because you've got your ears close to the ground. While rural slowdown is well established and it's lasted now over a year, we can see that in India Inc. earnings as well. Urban consumption perhaps is something which is very sporadic and it started in just few pockets. Tell me what the reality is on ground firstly, and how grave is the urban slowdown?
I think I will not call it a grave situation yet, but the fact is that last 1 year, the growth for retail has been around 5%. And yeah, we all know that when it comes to consumption and retail, it's always been that the urban sector really takes up the big chunk of buoyancy and they start consuming fastest. We've seen that most of the consumers in the urban sector are not really consuming as much, especially when it comes to discretionary products. So when we look at items like garments, cosmetics, beauty care, etc., or sometimes even jewelry, when it is a non-festival period, the businesses have not been so great. A big chunk of this lack of sufficient consumption, if I may call it that, has been because people at the bottom of the pyramid have not been really joining in to really consume enough. So on the one hand, we are seeing that there is a slowdown of consumption by people in this lower middle class and below, especially in the urban sector. And in the rural sector, of course, there is some amount of boost sometimes because there is some amount of expenditure on infrastructure, like what Anand said. But it could be better. Most of us are accustomed to a double-digit growth normally. So that's one of the things that we are seeing on the one hand. On the other hand, I think there is also various things that's kind of questioning the fact of the slightly better of consumers spending easily. And that's something that I'd like to come to sometime later. But overall, I think consumption has to grow up to be able to really support the GDP growth that we all want to acquire or go towards. And we are seeing hesitation on the minds of the consumer. Could be on the one hand because many of the customers, especially in the middle class part of the segment, are paying large EMIs that they've taken up for large capital purchases that they had made immediately after the pandemic. It's also because I think many of them have got various other places to go and put their money in, and there is not guaranteed income for them going forward, or there is no big increment for them to go forward.
But Kumar, I mean, is it largely inflation linked, you think? Because, you know, like you rightly mentioned, from those COVID lows, I mean, you started off with revenge buying. It came out to phenomena like YOLO, you only live once. And then, of course, you know, there was that feel-good factor as well. The economy jumped from the COVID lows in no given time. Equity markets were booming. Pretty much all asset classes were, doing well. Why has that effect weaned off so quickly?
Yeah, I think what you're saying is right. The fact is that for a lower middle class, especially if you really look at it, that's where the real belly of consumption is. The impact of inflation has been quite substantial. If you really look at 2020, 21 to the prices today, many of them, even for normal in compulsory consumption products, which I will not call it discretionary at all, the product prices have gone up by at least 30 to 40%. The garment prices have gone up because of cotton prices. Various items that they buy as normal day-to-day grocery, all those items have definitely gone up. And many times it is more than 50% rise in the price of products. So that's impacted them. On the other hand, their income levels have not gone up dramatically. I think that is that disparity that comes in. So the place where they are cutting corners is when it comes to discretionary products, and that's why we are seeing different levels of consumption for different categories. They are also spending on some other items now. The fact is that they are all traveling, so you can see that the travel and hospitality sector is still doing decently. So that need for that you only live once is still there. That YOLO is not gone away completely. The medical inflation is also quite high for many of them, because after COVID, I think medical prices have also gone up quite a bit on some of the items, and the incidences of medical issues have also kept creeping up into the families. So all this has definitely impacted consumption.
Sure. Anand, you were talking about what the budget can do when it comes to priorities for the sector and try and give the fillip to consumption, which clearly seems to be slowing down. Tell me, what are the out-of-the-box and proactive measures that you think could further stimulate urban consumption in particular?
See, urban consumption is about 66% of all consumption, right? So in that sense, it broadly is two classes. One is the affluent households. These are households greater than 30 lakh income. And then you have middle income, right, which is between 3 and 30 lakhs. Now, India is going to add about 100 million households in this decade, right, in the middle income category. So like Kumar was saying, if we really need to look at mass consumption and grow mass consumption, then one particular area, especially in urban environments, is rent, right, that people pay. And therefore, they're willing to move outside and invest in a home. And if you can get low-cost housing available for a lot of the real estate focus in the past few years post the pandemic has been on affluent housing, on relatively premium housing. But if we were to look at lower cost housing, that will lead to a cascading impact on durables, on electricals, on cement, on various other things that are used when you build a home, right? So that is one critical area. The second is, of course, from an urban standpoint, there has been a slowdown in wages too, right? Especially post the pandemic, we had a lot of demand for data scientists and skilled IT talent, etc. Some of that has slowed down. Similarly, if we were to look at wages itself, again, while inflation has grown faster than wage increases, that's been the other area, right? So how can you get more employment growing? And particularly areas like vocational education, like upskilling people. We had the internship that was announced last year. So some of that to just get all of the young workforce that's coming, 2/3 of India is under the age of 35, 50% under the age of 25. So employment, I think, will be the other big area, particularly with a focus on urban employment. We have a lot of focus on rural employment through various government schemes, but urban employment through skill building is, I think, another very important area.
Kumar, what do you think the budget can do in terms of some measures that could further stimulate both urban as well as rural consumption? And do you think, a tax slab change is the only answer?
Yeah, I think firstly, there has to be recognition that consumption is the most important part of really taking the economy forward. And for that, there has to be a focus on what individuals are really going through to make sure that they feel confident to consume. The tax benefits that one can provide will definitely help. I think there has to be a definite change in the tax slabs so that people who are in the bracket up to about 10 lakhs of rupees should feel hardly any pinch of taxation at all. That's on the one hand on direct taxes. On the indirect taxes, I think the vision of the government has to be slightly more longer term. I'll tell you why. on the one hand, we are hearing that there are various changes getting done to try and help the consumers at the bottom of the pyramid. But on the other hand, the incidence of indirect taxes, especially on goods and services, seems to be getting impacted quite often at various levels. So all of a sudden, we are now hearing that there is a possibility that items of a particular price and above will get taxed much higher, almost like a sin tax. Now, if that does happen, I think it's going to create an issue, because customers are going to find that when it comes to consumption in real terms, when they want to have a marriage in the family or when there are occasions, they'll find the items to be too expensive. So they can either not buy, or they will try and buy it from elsewhere in the world, in which case India is going to lose out on the consumption that should have been happening inside this country. So this is the big worry that we have, even for the lower middle class or the middle class. The higher strata of the segment will definitely go and shop outside. They won't even bother to shop within the country. So I think we need to be careful about the way we change taxes on goods and services. There are some services where there is an inverted structure of taxation which needs to be immediately recognized. For example, if you've got an item that's been bought at about 18%, but you are charging a 5% after doing work on it, then the input credit is not available, and that's in fact going out of the pockets of the consumers. Again, those are to be really taken care of. We hear that quite often in the garment sector, where inputs have got a higher rate of taxation than the tax at which they are able to recover money when they sell it outside, and that's again a worry. So there are things that needs to be really toned there to make it easier and smooth. More importantly, I think the ability to do business has to be really eased out. The cost of managing the various issues that happens around businesses, especially in retail, is very high. The gestation period for setting up a store can be high because there are about 40 licenses to be taken. There are issues that keeps happening at various parts of the country because some state or the other in their goodness have imposed some new license which was otherwise not there. I mean, we keep hearing that from various parts of the country. Recently, Karnataka had a problem of some trade license issue. Some other part of the country had an issue of some stamp duty registration for new property that retailers were willing to take up on lease. Now, these are all items that's creating issues for business, which effectively gets passed on as cost of goods for many of the consumers. So I think ease of doing business is a big area to really think about.
Interesting. Anand, since tax is your company's forte, you think income tax reduction is perhaps a simpler answer and an ask from the finance minister to try and give the consumption sector a fillip and consumption at large too?
See, it's always an incentive to put more money in the hands of the consumer, right? So that's always something which helps improve consumption. But beyond that, there's also a lot of indirect impact that taxes have, right? Every product that you consume, and hence rationalizing there and simplification, a large part of it which has already been done. But in all of these exceptions, right? It's more exception handling. How do we make it a lot more simpler, right? And not bring in unnecessary complexity is the other area where life can become a lot easier for the consumer if taxes are rationalized.
Interesting. So to that extent, Anand, and since we didn't chat about what's happening in the rural markets, now, they've shown impressive resilience when it comes to growing consumption, infrastructure development. Having said that, yes, discretionary consumption has definitely taken a hit, Anand. But what specific initiatives do you think can amplify this trend and unlock the sort of, full potential, if you will, of rural retail markets for a sustainable growth?
Well, this is the first year after an election for the government, and hence it's a good time to take agricultural reforms, right, a lot more intensely. One particular area is obviously around all this fertilizer subsidy bill that we take during the budget. Some of easing out some of that and instead transferring it as direct benefit transfers, right, to farmers, particularly 50% of the population still depends on agriculture. right? That is one way by which you can put more money in the hands of the consumer, right? So that's an area, I mean, all things farm related, agricultural sector reforms, reducing inefficiencies in having these input subsidies, etc., is, I think, one big area where something can be done. The second area is to look at productivity itself, right? For every money that is spent in rural India, when it comes to employment guarantees and other social sector reforms, it's important that the quality of delivery also improves and the monitoring and implementation improves, right? So that you're able to use all the money that you spend a lot more productively. So again, I think investing in technology, whether it is farmer producer organizations or just looking at various citizen governance centers, making them a lot more efficient, right? By using the right technology and making it available to the consumer, I think can also ease up a lot of cost that goes into transport and wastages. So these are two broad areas where I think directionally we have been looking at some amount of change happen over the years, but it could just shift gears and be a lot more intense given that is the first year of the election. And we won't have too many elections coming up in the near future, except maybe Delhi, which is around the corner.
Yeah, that's an interesting point. Kumar, I want you to come in here because, like Anand said, that technology and advancement and investment in technology can play a very big role to try and streamline, ease of doing business like you were highlighting earlier. Tell me, what policies or investments can the government introduce to try and foster innovation in, say, e-commerce while also empowering traditional kirana stores and small retailers?
Yeah, that's a good question. Actually, some parts of it, the government is already put into place. So most of us have heard about this concept called the Open Network for Digital Commerce. Now, that's a great initiative. It's been housed in such a manner that it can really take off without necessarily any hindrance of being tied up by anybody at all. Most of the retailers can now get onto an e-commerce capability without really needing to spend too much and be visible to their consumers all the time. And I think there has to be some push to make sure that ONDC is made available to every small retailer in the country so that they can participate in this omni-channel world. Otherwise, like you're saying, the consumer wants to shop online as well as offline. They want to shop from a place they trust, but they sometimes don't shop from the physical place that they trust because the person is or the particular company is not available online for them to shop, and customers are getting accustomed to that convenience. So definitely that would be of help. Second thing is to start that many a times the retailers don't even have the basic technology infrastructure. So any kind of boost that can be given to try and help them in implementing the first set of, let's say, point of sale systems, and that can be given as a tax shop, it can be given as a DBT, it can be given as any other method, would really help. So if any retailer says is willing to take up computerization, get technology up in the first instance, which is at the point of sale, there should be some benefit being given so that there's some boost happening on that account. The third part of it is about acceptance of money. I think there is still a lot of money that is happening as cash to be paid to many parts of the retail businesses, which should be kind of taken care of by making sure that any form of taking money, which is by any digital means, should be much cheaper than taking cash, which means that the MDRs, the merchant discount rate, should be really re-looked at. If it can be completely removed in altogether or be subsidized quite a bit, there should be a capability to try and see if there is some kind of incentive given for retailers who are accepting money by digital means, which again is method of digitizing, and that really makes sure everything will work on that account. The other part is about this whole thing around agriculture, manufacturers, etc. I think the ability to see an item being manufactured or produced or grown up to the time it goes to the hands of the consumer should be fully digitized. And for that, there's a lot of infrastructure play that can be utilized. The government has to come out with a very large capability point there. They can involve a lot of public-private partnerships to make it happen, but the ability to reduce wastage in the system and to make items be available to consumers at the same time not allow for any excess manufacturing would make a big difference. So any incentive that can be given to digitize that whole supply chain from manufacture up to consumption should be really recognized and incentivized.
Absolutely. A lot of food for thought in there, definitely, Kumar. But Anand, if I could just wrap it up with you, how do you think the government's budget incentives further can accelerate, say, R&D efforts and position India as a global leader in the retail innovation space?
Very important point. In fact, we just touched upon the e-commerce side, and we're seeing a lot of quick commerce come in. And that has also led to D2C brands emerge, private labels emerge, which are giving competition to many of our FMCG brands, right? And therefore, we looked at R&D spends and we saw that India significantly underspends on R&D and localized innovation, right? Globally, it's about 2.5%. In India, it's less than 0.5%. And hence, incentivizing local innovation and looking at things like regionalization, adapting to India's needs. It's a vast continent-sized country, and therefore, how do you bring in more R&D, which is focused on India? I think is a very important area, and we've had reasonable success in areas like pharma, for example, where we have the largest number of FDA plants outside of the US. So, can we also look at bringing in some of these policies which help grow some of these other sectors into some of the consumption sectors? And we've all seen China Plus One emerge as a big story, especially in electronics. So again, can we incentivize electronics manufacturing, right? So these are areas where R&D can play a very big role. And there's beyond the central government's budget, there's also a lot of intense competitive state rivalry, right? So the state budgets also have an important role to play in promoting R&D.
Anand, Kumar, both of you, thank you so much for taking the time out and speaking with us today. We got a good color on what one should expect from the budget this time around and what, more importantly, the budget can do to try and give a fillip to consumption. Thank you, both of you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.